Welcome to CRJ 134. This week we're taking a look at Chapter 8, which explores the family and delinquency. And this chapter starts with talking about different information about children in the United States. And one important thing to remember is that children from working poor families are the most likely to suffer from inadequate child care. In addition, the family is undergoing economic stress. Nearly 20% of all children live in poverty. So think about the impact that living in poverty has to do with how one is raised. How do you think that you might have turned out if you'd been raised in a similar situation? Or maybe you were raised in that situation. How did it impact you? Now, this chapter also notes that boys seem to be more affected by the post-divorce absence of the father. Now, why does this seem to be the case? In many families, the mother is one who enforces discipline, or is she? Researchers have found that the effects of divorce on children are not short-term and transient, but they're rather long-lasting and cumulative. Do you agree with that? Do you think that children of divorced parents struggle with the fear that the relationships will fail like those of their parents? Now, not all unhappy marriages end in divorce, of course. Some continued in this atmosphere of conflict. And research suggests that there seems to be little difference between the behavior of children who merely witness family violence and those who are actually victims of it. Now, in fact, some research efforts show that observing family conflict is a more significant determinant of delinquency than actually being its target. Now, why might that be the case? One of the things to consider here. The research also shows that children growing up in families that are disrupted by the death of a parent are better adjusted than children of divorce. Now, again, another curious question: why might that be the case? And do you think that in family situations such as divorce, it's a better option than staying together? Now, parenting skills certainly influence a child's involvement in delinquency, as does the style of discipline. Now, think about your own parents' discipline style. The question of which comes first, the bad parents or bad kids, is kind of discussed in the focus on delinquency in this chapter. And do you think that parenting is the key factor, or could it be something else like genetics rather than parenting? Now, research findings substantiate that there is a relationship between parental deviance and delinquent behavior, especially when we look at the father's deviant behavior. And some experts suggest that the link between parental deviance and the child's misbehavior could be genetic. Do you accept that? Why or why not? Think about that. Or is it a combination of things more than just simply genetics? Now, child abuse and neglect are also discussed in terms of the history of it and what is the definition of child abuse and neglect. And the text points out that no matter how it's defined, the effects can be devastating. Now, when you read it, were you surprised at the extent of child abuse that was known to exist? How do you think that child abuse can be monitored, or is that even possible? Are you also surprised that the most recent child maltreatment survey found that 84% of victims were abused by a parent acting alone or with another person? Do you find it surprising that many victims of child abuse were maltreated by their mothers acting alone? Now, surveys indicate that there's a high rate of reported abuse and neglect among people in the lower socioeconomic classes. We also find undereducated persons in the lower economic class. Now, people who are less educated may be more likely to solve problems physically because they lack the verbal skills to do so. Is it possible that abuse that's committed in the middle and upper classes is more often hidden? Now, when it comes to state intervention into abuse and neglect cases, the most critical part of the proceeding is the disposition hearing. So in making their decisions, the courts are generally guided by three different interests: the role of the parents, protection of the child, and the responsibility of the court. And that's not always easy to balance. Can they actually be balanced? Now, finally, the text looks at the link between abuse, neglect, and delinquency. It talks about studies of juvenile offenders that have confirmed that somewhere between 70 and 80% have abusive backgrounds. Do those findings surprise you? So I know I've asked a lot of questions, but there's a lot of things to think about here, the impact of family on delinquency. Next time we'll take a look at Chapter 9, which explores the influence that peers have on delinquency.